My mum thought she had replaced my dad with her creepy lover, but she didn't know I was still in touch with him. I'd never considered myself a student of human behaviour, yet here I was, meticulously cataloguing every movement, every subtle inflection, every fleeting expression of my mother as she moved through the house. The morning light fell across the living room, illuminating the familiar spaces my father had once occupied, now subtly rearranged, adjusted, as if the rooms themselves had been edited to erase his presence. She believed she had succeeded completely, that her new lover had occupied every corner of her life, and that the past, the life my father and I had shared, was entirely irrelevant. But she could not know the quiet lines of communication I had maintained with him, the fragments of truth and memory we exchanged like private lifelines, shaping my awareness in ways she would never suspect. At first, I observed almost without thought. I would sit in the corner of the room ostensibly absorbed in a book or the muted glow of my phone, but my attention was fixed on her. Every gesture carried weight, the way her fingers lingered over the edge of a table, the slight tilt of her head when she anticipated his arrival, the careful alignment of objects as if to maintain some unspoken order. Her movements were a choreography of perceived control, each step calculated to convey stability and confidence. Yet beneath this practiced exterior, the tension was palpable. I began to recognize the patterns, the subtle adjustments in posture, the timing of speech, the micro-expressions that betrayed fleeting uncertainty. Her lover's presence only magnified the delicate balance she maintained. In public, he was attentive, seemingly devoted, a mirror of her desire for replacement and completeness. In private, however, his behavior revealed nuances of influence and subtle manipulation. He positioned himself strategically, guided conversations with imperceptible cues, and subtly reframed her recollections to align with his narrative. Each of these actions was so deftly executed that anyone without a practiced eye would miss them entirely. I observed, catalogued, and reflected, noting how her confidence, though outwardly complete, rested on fragile scaffolding that could shift with a single misstep. My correspondence with my father served as a counterbalance to these observations. Our messages were long, thoughtful, and rich with detail. Through them, we reconstructed fragments of shared memory, clarified ambiguous incidents, and analysed the strategies my mother's lover employed. His perspective was calm, deliberate, and illuminating. He reminded me of the patterns I had instinctively noticed in childhood, the subtle ways people exert influence, the micro-tactics of persuasion, the fragile structures upon which confidence and perception are built. Each exchange deepened my understanding, reinforcing the realization that knowledge, when wielded responsibly, can protect, illuminate, and empower. Childhood memories, previously dormant, resurfaced with unexpected relevance. I recalled the minor quarrels with siblings, the quiet competitions for attention, the unspoken rules that guided behavior in our household. These lessons in observation and interpretation, trivial at the time, now seemed essential. They had prepared me for the intricate psychological landscape I now navigated, equipping me with the patience, attention to detail, and subtle discernment necessary to parse human behavior with precision. As weeks turned into months, the patterns became clearer, more detailed. I catalogued her movements, her routines, her micro-expressions, and the interactions she shared with her lover. The tilt of her shoulders when he complimented her, the timing of her laughter, the way she paused before responding, all became evidence of attention she could neither acknowledge nor fully perceive. I also noticed small cracks in his own performance, the moments when his charm faltered, the slight irritation hidden behind polite smiles, the unintentional reveal of impatience when plans did not align with his desires. These observations were not merely passive, they were data points in a larger understanding of control, influence, and perception. I spent hours reflecting on the moral weight of my knowledge. What was my responsibility in this quiet theatre of observation? To intervene, to remain silent, to manipulate outcomes subtly as a counterbalance to the manipulations I witnessed. Each decision carried ethical weight, and I navigated them with caution, understanding that even passive awareness could shape outcomes in ways I could not fully predict. Flashbacks intertwined with my observations, enriching my understanding. I remembered quiet evenings with my father, lessons in patience, in reading unspoken signals, in interpreting small cues for larger meaning. I recalled the way he taught me to notice inconsistencies, to weigh words against actions, to understand the motives that underlie behavior. These memories provided both guidance and reassurance, grounding my perception and giving me the confidence to interpret the unfolding dynamics with nuance and accuracy. The psychological landscape of our household revealed itself as layered, intricate, and often contradictory. My mother's routines adjusted subtly in response to her lover, her behaviors calibrated to project confidence while masking anxiety. The lover's strategies, consistent yet delicate, demonstrated how influence operates quietly, through timing, positioning, selective affirmation, and subtle reframing of events. I began to anticipate reactions, interpret intentions, and understand how each action reverberated across the network of relationships in ways both visible and invisible. Each day, the weight of observation deepened. I catalogued minor gestures, the nuances of speech, the careful choreography of movement, and correlated them with the known patterns of influence and manipulation. I realized the cumulative effect of these small acts, how perception is shaped incrementally, how control is maintained through subtlety, and how even the smallest truths can unravel a carefully constructed illusion. My father's quiet presence, though mediated through letters and messages, provided a stabilizing counterpoint. His patience, consistency, and clarity illuminated the underlying truths that my mother's perception obscured. Observing the contrast between his calm influence and the lover's subtle manipulations offered insight into the enduring dynamics of trust, loyalty, and perception. At night, when the house fell silent, I reflected on the cumulative weight of my knowledge. The responsibility of observation was immense, requiring constant vigilance, ethical discernment, and psychological resilience. Every insight carried potential consequences. Every understanding had implications for action or inaction. I recognized that the act of observation was itself transformative, shaping not only my perception of others but also my understanding of my own capabilities, moral compass, and emotional boundaries. Subtle shifts in my mother's routines became more pronounced. She unconsciously adapted to the lover's expectations, repeating phrases he used, aligning the rhythm of her day with his presence, and modifying gestures to suit his perceived preferences. These adaptations, minor as they seemed, revealed the pervasive influence of unacknowledged authority and the vulnerability inherent in constructed realities. I tracked these behaviors meticulously, noting deviations, patterns, and the ways in which influence and perception intertwined to shape daily life. I also began to understand the long-term implications of these dynamics. Influence, once embedded, shapes not only immediate behavior, but also perception of self, memory of events, and internalized emotional responses. My mother's identity, once rooted in independence and past experiences, was being subtly reconstructed in response to continuous, unseen pressures. Recognizing this, I reflected on my own agency, how knowledge, patience, and ethical awareness could mediate outcomes without overt interference. Flashbacks deepened the understanding of present events. I remembered afternoons spent observing interactions between my parents, noting inconsistencies between words and behavior, and understanding the nuances of influence long before I could articulate them. These memories became templates, enabling me to decode current dynamics with clarity, precision, and ethical insight. I recognized patterns that had endured across time, subtle mechanisms of control, and the enduring impact of attentive observation. The household itself seemed to respond to these subtle shifts. Rooms that once felt stable now carried undercurrents of tension. Conversations that seemed routine contained layers of unspoken negotiation. Each day brought new insights into the interplay of influence, perception, and decision-making. I catalogued each observation, reflecting on the broader implications for identity, autonomy, and the ethical dimensions of awareness. Gradually, the cumulative effect of these months of observation manifested as a deep, nuanced understanding of human behavior. I recognized the fragility of perceived control, the subtlety of influence, and the moral and psychological responsibilities inherent in knowledge. I became attuned to the ways in which perception could be shaped silently, loyalty tested indirectly, and truth obscured without overt deception. Each observation, reflection, and flashback contributed to a sophisticated model of behavior, interaction, and influence, both within my mother's household and in my own understanding of human dynamics. The subtle cracks I had been cataloguing in my mother's demeanor grew more evident with each passing week. Her gestures, once fluid and seemingly effortless, now betrayed micro-hesitations, barely perceptible pauses before she reached for objects, a fraction of a second glance toward the hallway, as if expecting someone unseen. Her lover remained composed, almost too composed, as though he sensed the instability beneath her performance, but chose to exploit it silently. The way he lingered near the edges of rooms, the calculated positioning of his hands, the slight modulation in his tone, all were instruments of control, carefully applied yet often unnoticed by anyone but me. I observed him with the same precision, noting each adjustment, each calculated reinforcement, and each subtle attempt to guide my mother's perception. My own awareness had become a lens through which the entire household could be analyzed. Every movement, every expression, every shift in posture or glance was a data point. I began constructing mental models of behavior, predicting reactions, anticipating strategies, and testing my understanding against real outcomes. My correspondence with my father provided constant calibration. Through our messages, I could verify interpretations, explore alternative explanations, and refine my assessments of influence and intent. He remained a stabilizing presence, a touchstone of ethical clarity and perceptual accuracy, guiding me through the complexity of my observations without dictating conclusions. Flashbacks to my early childhood surfaced with striking clarity during these analyses. I remembered the quiet lessons in patience and observation that my father had instilled in me, the subtle ways he taught me to read expressions, gestures, and tone. I recalled afternoons spent quietly watching interactions, noting inconsistencies between words and actions, learning that truth often manifests in the smallest details. These memories were no longer just reflections, they were tools, enabling me to navigate the psychological landscape with precision and insight. I recognized patterns of influence, manipulation, and perception that now resonated with the present circumstances, deepening my understanding of both my mother and her lover. The psychological tension in the household escalated. My mother's carefully maintained facade began to show more pronounced signs of strain. Brief moments of hesitation extended into longer periods of indecision. The micro-expressions I had been monitoring became more overt. Slight frowns, shifts in weight, and subtle changes in the cadence of her speech. The lover's reactions, though still controlled, sometimes faltered in response, revealing glimpses of frustration or impatience that he carefully masked. These interactions formed a complex choreography, a silent negotiation of power, influence, and perception that played out daily before my eyes. I reflected on the ethical dimensions of my ongoing observation. The knowledge I possessed carried both power and responsibility. How far could I allow events to unfold before intervention became necessary? Did the act of observation itself alter the dynamics? And if so, was it ethical to continue? These questions occupied my mind constantly, guiding my internal decision-making and shaping the lens through which I interpreted behavior. Observation was not neutral. It was an active engagement with reality, a moral and psychological exercise in understanding, empathy, and foresight. As the months progressed, I documented subtle manipulations with increasing granularity. The lover's techniques were sophisticated, timing compliments to reinforce compliance, adjusting tone to guide emotional response, using spatial positioning to assert presence without confrontation, and selectively validating behaviors to maintain influence. My mother, unaware of these techniques, adapted unknowingly, internalizing cues that subtly reshaped her perceptions and decisions. By tracking these patterns, I could anticipate outcomes, interpret intentions, and comprehend the intricate interplay of influence and response. Flashbacks provided critical context for interpreting these dynamics. I recalled moments of sibling rivalry, minor conflicts over trivial privileges, and subtle competitions for parental attention. At the time, these experiences seemed mundane, almost inconsequential. Now, they revealed themselves as foundational exercises in understanding influence, perception, and social negotiation. These memories allowed me to trace patterns of behavior, anticipate responses, and navigate the psychological landscape with the precision of someone intimately familiar with the mechanisms of subtle power. The months of meticulous observation revealed not only the dynamics between my mother and her lover, but also the enduring impact of my father's presence. His guidance, though indirect, provided a framework for interpreting events, understanding motives, and maintaining ethical clarity. I became increasingly aware of the contrast between his consistent, grounded influence and the lover's more immediate, manipulative strategies. This awareness reinforced the complexity of human behavior, highlighting the tension between short-term control and long-term integrity, appearance and reality, manipulation and truth. At night, when the house fell silent, I reflected on the cumulative weight of my knowledge. The responsibility of observation was immense, requiring constant vigilance, ethical discernment, and psychological resilience. Every insight carried potential consequences. Every understanding had implications for action or inaction. I recognized that the act of observation was itself transformative, shaping not only my perception of others but also my understanding of my own capabilities, moral compass, and emotional boundaries. Subtle shifts in my mother's routines became more pronounced. She unconsciously adapted to the lover's expectations, repeating phrases he used, aligning the rhythm of her day with his presence, and modifying gestures to suit his perceived preferences. These adaptations, minor as they seemed, revealed the pervasive influence of unacknowledged authority and the vulnerability inherent in constructed realities. I tracked these behaviors meticulously, noting deviations, patterns, and the ways in which influence and perception intertwined to shape daily life. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Tale Hub for more stories like this.